Welcome to the Selling Show, where we unpack,
Discovery,
repack,
my friends.
and break down exactly how top experts
No,
sell
it's
their
not
ideas,
the new
their
Star
value,
Trek
and their
show on
services.
Paramount
This is your
Plus.
host, David Newman,
It's how
and you are in the right
actually
place.
make money.
If you want
and we
better
have
clients,
the
bigger
man,
deals,
the
and
myth,
higher fees.
the legend, Mr. Will Bachman, founder, CEO, Grand Poobah of Umbrex, with us to help unpack everything you need to know about smart discovery for consultants. Will, welcome to the show.
David, thank you so much for having me.
So even before we jump in, talk to us a little bit about Umbrex and what Umbrex is and how it works and why it's awesome. And then we'll dive right into our discovery conversation chat.
Well, thank you, David. When I left McKinsey & Company in 2008 to start my own independent consulting practice, I felt a need. That was, I knew how to be a consultant, but I did not know how to run a consulting practice. How do you get business liability insurance? How do you send an invoice? How do you create a statement of work, et cetera? So I personally felt that need. And I thought other people might feel that need as well. So I connected with some people that had already left McKinsey and started their own practice. Their advice was helpful to me. And I began organizing events, connecting other independent consultants. And that grew. People told others. And so what we've evolved to is we help connect independent consultants with one another. We do events in person and online. We also have an online forum. We do mastermind groups. And the business model is we do not charge our members. We help our clients find the right independent consultant for their project needs.
Awesome. Look at that. I was actually going to make a joke, and all of this is available for a low price of $87,000 per year, because that's the value people are going to get. And it's an amazing business model. And we'll talk more about how people can get connected and kind of tap into that a little bit later on. But our topic and theme is an area where I think a lot of consultants lose the deal. They think they lose the deal at the end. They think it's like, oh, I can't close. I don't know what to do. I don't want to use high pressure, pushy tactics. But it's not really a failure to close, in my humble opinion. It's a failure to open. It's a failure to open. I know you're masterful at this, and you've got, all kinds of amazing things to share with us. Talk about, well, let's do Denzel Washington. Explain it to me like I'm a 7-year-old. In the consulting world, what is discovery? Let's start there.
All right. Well, I'll start with one counterintuitive take, David, which is clients do not care about your past experience. I'll say that again. Clients don't care, with the caveat of once you're in the room with them or once you're in that discussion. It's super boring to hear about your background. Now, clients may ask you, oh, well, tell us about your relevant experience. But actually, they don't care about the answer. They only ask that because they don't know what else to ask. They think that's what they're supposed to ask. But they don't really care, and it's boring to hear about your case studies about, 10 years ago, I did this project for XYZ, very similar to this. Like, it's boring. So if you get that question about, tell us about your experience, you know the answer to this, David, which is not to answer the question, but to turn it around, turn that question into a question back at them. Sure, I'd be happy to talk about my past experience, but I want to make sure it's relevant to you. So could you just tell me a little bit more about, right? And then turn it back and start delving into their current situation. Because what do clients like to talk about? The same thing you and me, David. They like to talk about their problems, right? So I have what I call the 70-30 squared rule. 70-30 squared. And that's in a conversation, in that discovery conversation, the client should be talking 70% of the time, and the consultant should be talking 30% of the time. And of your 30% that you're talking, 70% of that should be asking smart questions. And only 30% of the 30% should be, answering their questions and giving you context on your firm. You're going to demonstrate how smart you are, not by your answers, but by your questions. And you're going to need their answers to develop the right proposal, right? So with that preface in mind, I sit on a lot of discovery calls, occasionally with consultants. And so I have a chance to see some people do these. And when I was just purely an independent consultant myself, I would do maybe 6 to 8 to 10 of these per year. But now in my current role, running Umbrex, where we're meeting with clients, I'll do 15 a week. So I've had more repetitions under my belt, more opportunities to refine it. So some of the questions that I would suggest you incorporate in that mix, and you can kind of figure out what's the right order for them, is first of all, help me understand the context. And just shut up, right? Just start with that. Like, help me understand the context. Why now, right? Why are you doing this project now? What have you done so far? So normally the best path for any firm is to do something in-house. I mean, even as consultant, that's counter to what we'd like. That's normally the best approach, is to do it with their own people. So what have you done so far? Try to understand, because you want to hear their answers. Like, maybe they tried it and it failed. Well, that's good to know. Maybe they just don't have the people in-house. Maybe someone's on maternity leave. Maybe they just have no idea how to get started. So how would you do this?
Or maybe they tried it and they totally screwed it up.
Exactly, right? So what are you hoping to accomplish? I mean, it's kind of an obvious question, but what are you hoping to accomplish? And they'll tell you. If they aren't giving the actual business value, we're hoping to improve customer engagement. Try to refine that answer, get them to think it through. Well, what's the actual business value, right? What's the business value behind that? So if they're saying, well, improve customer engagement, well, what would that mean? If we were, what percent to what percent? So let's say we're going to improve our customer retention. Well, if we can improve customer retention from 70% to 80%, how many customers do you have? How many are you losing every year? What's the value of one customer for one additional year? Do the multiplication. Okay, so the value is an extra $5 million a year if we increase customer retention from 80% to 85%. Okay, so now we've established the business value, and they may not have done that calculation because that can put in context later on your fees, right? So if the project is worth $5 million if it's successful on an annual basis, then it seems reasonable to think about, $500,000 in fees puts that in context, right? So who are the stakeholders involved in this project? And what's your time frame? Like, when are you thinking about getting started? Now, I like to ask, okay, and this is one where I think a lot of consultants are so tempted to say, I know the answer. I know how to do this project. Here's how my firm likes to go about and do this. But I prefer the more humble approach and just say, well, there's a number of different ways we could approach this problem, right? There's always like small, medium, large. There's always different types. Tell us, what's your mental model of how this project would play out? Like, what are you thinking that this would involve? Put it on them. Get them to say, well, because you might be thinking that this is a 9-month project, 3 people on it, in depth, and they're thinking that it's a set of 6 workshops, right? And if you propose what we normally do this with this 9-month thing, 3 people on it, they're going to say, okay, forget about it. But if they say, well, we think it's going to be 6 workshops, then you're like, okay, I can tailor to that. And if that can be a profitable approach, that's what you pitch. Or if they're thinking, maybe you're thinking it's 6 workshops, but they think, well, we think we need 3 people really on the ground for 3 or 4 months because this is a big thing for us. Surprise. Let them tell you what they want. It's much easier in consulting to sell people what they want, to change their minds and convince them that they want to buy what you have to sell.
So this is really cool. May I interject for a quick moment?
I spoke a lot. It's positive.
No, this is great, though. I mean, so good. And people are going to need to rewind wherever you are, stop the car, get off the treadmill. You have to rewind, just re-listen to the last 7 or 8 minutes because Will dropped so many value bombs.
Hang on. Let's back up the truck. Beep, 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 beep. Listen, I have a brand new sales book out there. You got to get your hands on it. It is awesome. It is amazing. It is fantastic. It is useful, practical, actionable, and a ton of bonuses are waiting for you over at doitselling.com. Grab your copy right now and grab all the bonuses, goodies, companion tools, and downloads that go with the book. You'll love it. I guarantee it.
But with this part, I'm picking up the sensation that, we are the professional consultants. We are aware, based on our experience and expertise, what the typical depth and duration and detail of getting the client the outcomes that they want. My fear is, or my question, it's not a fear, my fear-based question is, are we not handing the prescription pad, if we're the doctor, handing the prescription pad to the patient and saying, you tell me what kind of cold medicine you want, and I'll write that up for you? Because 6 workshops is very different than a 9-month engagement. Whether we think it's 9 months, they think it's 6 workshops. We think it's 6 workshops. They want 9 months. Talk about what are some of the pros and cons of handing them the prescription pad in the way that you described, or did I miss a key piece?
Well, you do not necessarily have to go along and just say whatever you say we'll do. But what's important is we're talking about discovery. You are trying to surface what they have in mind, right? Now, you can after you surface that, you can challenge it, right? You can always say, well, okay, tell me a little bit more how you think that would play out. Or, okay, for example, let's take something a little bit more specific. Let's take someone has a factory. They want to transform to more lean operations approach, right? So one approach could be bringing in a full team of 3 operations consultants, full-time, 5 days a week. Another approach might be having someone be a coach who's more 1 day a week over a longer time frame, right? So they might, not feel that they're ready to absorb so much change in 12 weeks to bring in 3 people, and they think that just structurally they want their own team to do most of the work, and they want to get it done over a long-term time frame. They want to be coached, or they may just as legitimately want to start capturing the value much earlier. They don't want to coach. They're like, no, we don't have the capacity. Our people our supervisors don't have what it takes. We need you to come in and do it for us. So the key, what I'm trying to get at is you want to surface what they have in mind before you start pitching your own approach.
Really, really smart. And that's sort of level setting. Well, first it's finding out what their expectations are. Then it's level setting. And then it may be either course correcting or challenging or reframing if necessary. But part of this discovery, and this is brilliant, I've never really heard this, don't just find out what their problems are. Find out what they think the solution might look like. And that may be spot on, or it may be wildly inaccurate, but now we sort of know where their head is at.
Exactly. Yeah. So surface what they have in mind, and then push it even further, right? They ask them, okay, let's say the customer retention, like we talked about earlier. So rather than saying, getting all the way to the point of customer retention, okay, great. Yes, my firm has done 17 customer retention problems, and here's what we think is probably no. Okay, customer retention. What are your hypotheses on your customer retention challenges? Ask them what they think the answer is, right? Because they probably have a pretty good idea. Now, you don't necessarily have to assume that that's correct, but you want to get that. Again, you're trying to discover what they have in mind, right? Discover what they've done so far, discover their own hypotheses, what sorts of data, is available to work on that, discover what sorts of talent in-house would be dedicated to that project. And ask them, well, how important is it to you, and to what extent you want to have your own people involved in doing the work? So there's a transfer of skills. Try to avoid, this is sort of such a common tip, right? Avoid yes-no questions. I like to, if I'm ever tempted to ask a yes-no question, I try to reframe that as on the spectrum from A to Z, where do you fall? I try to ask a spectrum question. Another question that I like a lot is, help me understand the process, steps from procure to pay. So if they're saying, oh, we need to, fix our procure to pay. Well, okay, walk me through the steps right now from procure to pay. Just what does your current process flow look like? Help me understand a little bit about it. What's your current, walk me through the steps. We talked already about stakeholders. So who would be involved? What sorts of challenges or pushback would you expect from any of those stakeholders? And then we obviously want to get to the question, and I normally do it at the end, about some types, about variety of parameters. So are there any key milestones or any key dates that we should be aware of? And they might say, no, we just want to get it done as soon as possible. Or they might say, well, we have a board meeting on July 1st, and we really need to be able to present our findings to that. Okay, well, that's important. We're announcing to shareholders or something, right? So understand key dates, surfacing that. Understanding logistics, like, would you be expecting this work to be done on site, 100%, fully remote? Would you hybrid? Would you want the team to come in person for some key meetings? And if so, where? Know that up front. And then budget. So it's important to ask this question. Some people shy away from it, but you really have to ask this question. And it's, some people think like, oh, we can't talk about money, like ask people someone's salary, but just, what sort of budget did you have in mind for this? And I learned this tip from our mutual friend, David A. Fields, right? Our mutual friend, David A. Fields. And he has actually a couple chapters in his book, The Irresistible Consultant's Guide to Winning Clients, on what he calls a context discussion. We're calling it a discovery call. And when you ask about the budget, one tip I learned from David A. Fields is a lot of times, sometimes they'll tell you, right? Oh, here's the budget. Sometimes they'll say, well, they're trying to play a little bit. They don't want to reveal their cards. We're not really sure. We just kind of want to hear what your proposal is. Okay. So one way to get at it is to say, all right, well, there are different ways we could, size this. There's different ways we could approach it. And just to give us some kind of guidance, I understand you can't share your, budget. What number would just give you a heart attack, right? If we came back and said it was X, what number would give you a heart attack? And a good rule is they take the number that they give you and then divide by 2 or 3, and that will get you kind of what their budget is. So if they say, well, if their budget is actually maybe $100K and that's sort of what they're targeting, they say, well, if you came back for $250,000, that would be, or if their budget is, $250,000, they'd say, well, if you came back for $700,000. So it's going to be roughly. So that's one way to go about it. And then this kind of comes in a little bit later in the proposal phase, but getting some sense of the budget if you can. And then one thing I like to do in the proposal is to give sort of a gold, silver, platinum, right? Or still, bronze, silver, gold type of options. So you give some extreme gold-plated option, all the bells and whistles. Maybe that's $150,000. And then there's the silver option, which is a pretty good, and $95,000. And then there's a bronze version, which is $70,000 or $65,000. And someone says, well, they get anchored on the gold price. So that is what a project could cost. Boy, look at the silver. It's much less than that gold, but it gives us most of what we want. So it's a really good value. And we don't want to go for the bronze because just for a little bit more money, we get the silver, right? So they go for the silver. But sometimes people go for the gold. They're like, yeah, let's go for it. Who knows? Maybe it was even less than they were expecting. So that is one strategy, which does actually help then against, which we're not talking about right now, but against sort of this discounting discussion. Instead of giving just one option and they say, well, can we have that for 10% off? If you've laid out ahead of time, bronze, silver, gold, and they say, can we have it for 10% off? You say, well, if you don't like the silver price, go for the bronze. That's, we can reduce the scope and then you can do that
Right.
if that's what you want to pay. Yeah. So discovery, keep asking questions. And then at some point, they don't want to you can't ask questions just to the end. They may want to actually hear something about your firm. But once you've front loaded your questions, then you can reply back with most relevant examples of what you've done, right? Oh, you want this customer retention effort because your hypothesis is that it's mainly driven by friction of renewing. Well, we did something very similar with, client X, and here was what happened. And you can tell a story that's most relevant to them. So, discovery call.
Talk to us a little bit about the posture. What should our posture be as we're coming into this? My theory is that too many consultants come in very subservient, very afraid to poke the bear and really find out what's going on. And they're way too concerned with being liked and with sounding smart. Now, when you're continuously asking these questions, think of like a doctor and bedside manner. There's some doctors that don't have any bedside manner, and they're literally poking and prodding, and it feels like an interrogation. Yeah. There's other doctors that have a fantastic bedside manner, and you're like, oh, doc, don't leave. It's such a pleasure talking with you. And you're talking about like the rash that you have on your butt cheeks or something. So, if that conversation can be pleasant, any conversation can be pleasant. And yes, we just introduced the concept of a rash on your butt cheeks. However, talk about rapport and come from interrogation versus bedside manner.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So one reaction is something I didn't mention earlier, but is relevant to not every situation, but is relevant to some situations, which is in some cases, before you actually have the discovery meeting, you may have had some back and forth by email. You may have gotten an RFP. You may have some kind of documentation. You may have more or less idea about what the project's about. So if you do have more information about the project, in some cases, it does make sense to go into that meeting with paper, right? Bringing your own document, your own hypothesis. So I will do this occasionally. An example where you don't necessarily say, here's the answer, but if you can go in with a hypothesis tree, right? Or an issue tree and say, hey, we just did some preliminary thinking outside in, we heard from you. Because if you've done a little bit of discovery by email, we did a little bit of thinking outside in to structure our conversation. Would love to get your reaction to these thoughts, right? So that is a separate, different approach than the purely naive discovery call that we were talking about. And that can help a lot because number one, it's going to separate you from the crowd. A lot of people won't do that. And even if 80% of what you've done is wrong, it shows that you've done your homework. Even if your particular examples are not relevant to their case, they can say, okay, well, I can see how that would be relevant. In some cases, this is wrong. But yeah, you really hit the nail on the head with these two. These are probably it. And it gets you into that discussion as a peer problem solver. So to your other point about posture, I'd say over-prepare, but be indifferent to results. So that's kind of my Zen philosophy of client meetings, where you should go in and really do your homework, read about the company. That kind of goes without saying, understand what they do, their products or services, and be thinking about have maybe structure some thinking, but be completely prepared that you may not be the right choice for them. And be prepared to say, well, you know what? I think for this particular project, we are probably not the right choice for you. You might want to talk to firm X or Y. That is the most massive credibility building move. That's such a huge flex to do that, to say, because what it tells them is in terms of building a long-term trusted advisor relationship, they can say, holy smokes, this person is not going to say yes to everything. They have enough of their own business, their own flow. They're only going to take on stuff that is really a fit for them. And what a move to say, actually, we're not the best firm for this, but talk to these other folks. So be ready to do that in the meeting, to walk away from stuff. And, I'd say, I know you've recommended this on your other episodes of your show, but, read The Trusted Advisor by David Meister, another David, right? He has a great story in there. One of my favorite stories from the book and something that really stuck with me is, if I could just share this scene, right? So David Meister shares the scene in the book where he's a relatively junior consultant and he comes into a meeting with a senior consultant and they're sitting in a meeting and the client says, well, tell us about your experience in the industrial abrasives industry, right? And David Meister, the junior consultant, is thinking through all the projects they've done, thinking, what is industrial abrasives? And have we done anything that's roughly similar? And we've done something in industrials. Does that count? And before he can speak and open his mouth, the partner says, no, we haven't. That said, does it make sense to continue the discussion? And the client's, oh, yeah, sure. It's no problem. I was just curious, right? And so that told David Meister, hey, be willing to admit the limits of your experience. Don't exaggerate. Don't lie. Don't make stuff up. And it just builds huge credibility. So I think that's the posture to go into as a peer, as a problem solver. Another great book is Spin Selling by, I think it's Neil Rackham, where he goes through this approach of similar to what I've talked about, like, tell me what your problem is, and then what kind of help do you need? And then why do you think that we could help you? Right? And get the client to almost sell themselves on your firm of like, why should we help you? Like, what is it that you think we could do for you? So that's the posture, I think. You go in, over-prepared, but indifferent to results.
I think one critical piece that you and I both know intuitively, but I think it's worth mentioning out loud, and I'd love your 3 cents on it. When we ask all these great questions, the big danger and the big lost opportunity is not listening like your life depends on it. So it's one thing to master a flow of questions. It is quite something else to master a flow of questions and truly be in the moment, in that conversation with listening, deep listening, listening for what's being said, listening for what's not being said, listening for how they give you answers, listening for any sort of behavioral or attitude shifts based on where your questions are going, and then being able to have the conversation about the conversation. So for example, when we talk about, Bob runs department XYZ, let's go back to your procurement example. The problem is going to be Bob in procurement. And the way that they just said Bob in procurement, you're thinking, Bob must be a jerk. Bob must be a personality conflict with a lot of people who work here. Not surfacing that question and saying, well, that's very interesting. The way that you just referenced Bob, it sounds like Bob may be a problematic personality. Has that shown up in other areas? Or I'm curious, why did you mention Bob in procurement using that language and using that phrasing that you just used? Like, what's up with Bob? And sometimes we see those things or we hear those things. We have the internal dialogue, but we never verbalize it back to the client to dig in and say, hey, what's really going on here? Or what caused that change of tone? Or what caused you to warm up so much when I mentioned this? What caused you to back off so much when I asked you about that? And literally having the conversation about the conversation, right? The meta conversation that happens with every sale. Talk to us about the failure to listen and then what deep listening can do for you if you do it the right way.
I'm sorry, what were you saying, David?
Exactly.
So your example that you gave is a good one, because some people might take that, Bob in procurement might be a roadblock. And instead of doing what you've done to really identify that and try to surface that as an issue and say, help me understand a little bit more, like, what do you think Bob's concerns might be? They might instead basically shut down that line of inquiry. Says, oh yeah, like procurement, they've always, they're often a problem, right? Yeah, I totally know, but don't worry, we'll deal with it, right? It's starting to show, yeah. We've seen procurement before, but no, we know how to handle that. So again, listening for those things, I think you're right. And getting the emotional tone as well as the actual words is critical. So much of what we do in quote unquote listening is really just waiting for our turn to speak, as opposed to trying to respond emotionally to the other person.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned something that I have mixed feelings about a few moments ago. You mentioned RFPs. So like if you have an RFP, you have some advanced knowledge of what they want, and they've written up all these requirements and specs and criteria. My theory, and it's only a theory, but played out more often than not in practice, RFPs is where good consultants go to die. So what is your philosophy? What is your take on RFPs, the good, the bad, and the ugly?
So if something is like a public RFP that is just blasted to the universe, I'm usually not going to spend my time on that. But what I was more referring to is, in some cases, there's a range, right? So in some cases, a client will sole source. They'll just come to you. Well, that's a nice situation. But in some cases, they might go to, 2 or 3 trusted providers they've worked with before that have been highly recommended. And they may have written something on paper to say, here's what we're looking for. It might be a job description or it might be a project description. So that's more what I was referring to, that situation where they have something on paper they've sent you, here's what we're looking for. If something is just an open to the universe RFP, I'm usually a little bit less inclined to go after that. But if it's a limited universe that they've sent it out to, 2 or 3 people, then, that's fine to participate in those, right? And some clients are required, right, to get at least 3 bids on something.
Right.
So you want to get a vibe of the situation to get a feel for, am I the third that they're just inviting in because they really want number 1 and I'm just doing all this work just so they can check the box? Or am I the number 1 and they're going to go some other poor couple of suckers to be buckets number 2 and 3?
Right.
So you want to try to get a sense of that before you invest a lot of time in the proposal.
Yes, I know. Terrific episode here, but have you seen our latest web training? Oh my goodness, pop over there right now, or as soon as you're done listening to this episode, it's doitmarketing.com/webinar. See you over there. Back to the good stuff.
Another question for you is all of this amazing advice around discovery. I'm sure our listeners are channeling, or I'm channeling a question that they probably have. And it's this, Will, does all of this happen in a single conversation? Or when we talk about discovery, does it sometimes take 2 conversations or maybe even 3 conversations to surface the complete picture of what a client really wants and needs?
Well, I think it depends on the size of the project and the nature of it totally depends on the nature of it and how many stakeholders involved.
Yeah.
So, at one end of the spectrum, a $10,000 project where you're talking to the CEO, the decider, and it's a relatively small project, could very well just be one conversation.
Yeah.
If it's a $2 million project and it's, a lot of people involved, then it's probably not going to be one conversation, and everything else is somewhere in between. Oh, something I thought about before I did want to mention is one way to get better at discovery calls is 2 things. Number 1 is to rehearse ahead of time with another consultant who can role play that client, right? So, find a friend, phone a friend, find someone who you can tell them what you know about that person and have them role play it and then give you feedback. Did you listen 70-30? Did you ask questions? And you can ask them to be challenging or to be friendly, whatever. So role play, number 1. Number 2 is, in the right circumstances, see if you can actually invite someone into the room with you and say, so-and-so is my partner, or so-and-so is my advisor, or so-and-so may play a limited role on the project, or, make up something, right? Just to get someone in to listen. Or someone's always, just helping take notes, right? They could be your executive coach. They're just taking notes from me. And then get feedback, because practicing ahead of time will help you get more comfortable saying things like, oh, so what do you think about in terms of budget? And not, if you haven't said those words a lot of times, and help you probe in, just not forget stuff. And third thing is, have in front of you, if you're on a Zoom, literally have a literal checklist of questions to ask, because it's so easy to forget one. Oh my God, I forgot to ask about the milestones and start dates. So those were 3 additional points I want to make sure we slipped in there.
Really important. And remember, even professional airline pilots who are flying planes for 30 plus years, every day, every flight, every time, pre-flight checklist. Professionals do not fly without a pre-flight checklist, which is the checklist of bullet points and questions that you want to make sure to ask every single time so that you don't screw things up or do things out of order or skip steps.
Yeah, exactly.
Really, really great. I'm also channeling our folks going, wow, this is like a deep dive, vigorous tooth cleaning that I'm giving this prospect. How do I do this without seeming pushy or nosy or presumptuous? What's your answer to that? The person that might be, well, gosh, I'm asking all these intimate questions about how their internal process works and what they think is going on. And, shouldn't I be adding some value instead of just being nosy and getting my face all up in their business? What's your comfort or relief for that person who's like, Will, this sounds really pushy and really nosy. I'm not sure I can do this.
Well, interesting that that would even be an issue for some people. So thanks for asking. So in some relatively small subset of cases, in general, when I'm having these conversations, I have not yet signed a non-disclosure agreement. And the clients, just based on trust or based on having been introduced or something, will still answer all these questions and be pretty comfortable sharing, right? If the client, maybe was more skittish, maybe they would ask for a non-disclosure agreement or something to be signed. But I have never encountered a client, and I do 10 or 15 of these a week, where they start feeling like I'm asking too intimate questions. I mean, if you go to the doctor, you expect him to ask conditions about your situation and not to tell you, well, I've handled like 15, appendicitis in the past. So let me tell you about, all these appendicitis that I've handled. No, they want you want to tell them about what's happening to you right now, not about the past surgeries they've done. So clients like talking about their own company and their situation and what they're hoping to accomplish and their hopes and dreams and what could go wrong and what they've tried. They like talking about that stuff. It's what they live every day. And now they have a listener who cares and is interested and is sort of being a thought partner with them. Like at some point, they may kind of actually know, really, what do you think? And if they're really, really asking a question, at some point, you don't want to just dodge forever. And you could start saying, well, if they do, I try at that point still to say, well, it's a little bit early still for me to kind of give a perspective and tell you what I think the answer is. But my hypotheses are just, kind of show you how I think about this is I'd want to think about all the hypotheses. And here's come off the top of my head, A, B, C, D, E. Now, that might not be all of them, but that's sort of initial thought. And here's how I'm thinking that we might test these hypotheses. What do you think? And again, turn it back to them. So, at some point, you want to be a thought partner and not just a pure reporter. You want to position yourself as as a peer advisor. You're not their boss, right? You're not telling them what to do, but you're also not a subordinate. Oh, just give me orders and I'll do whatever you say. Yeah. You're a peer. You're a thought partner. You're a friend. You're having a conversation with them. And the more you can turn it into having a conversation versus just sort of taking orders or giving orders, saying, oh, this is how we're going to do this project. This is the way it's done. That doesn't come across so well. But, you also don't want to just say tell me exactly what to do and I'll do it for you. They can right. So it's it's a middle ground.
For sure. No, that's great. One thing that I know is on people's minds, especially because of the Umbrex business model and the Umbrex community population, which is many, many consultants coming out of the big firms, the big firm background, and now they're boutique or solo. Address for a moment why a large company, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, a lot of solo and boutique firms think, oh, I have no shot because they've got McKinsey on speed dial. They've got KPMG, PwC, they've got Bain, they've got all these guys on speed dial. I'm just a little single shingle shop. I have no shot. I have no chance. Obviously, these large corporations, of which there's hundreds and hundreds of buyers in each and every one, for some kind of projects, they will go to the big guys and gals. And for other projects, they will totally go to a specialist firm or a specialist practitioner or a specialist boutique firm. Talk to us about now having been on all three sides of the table, right? McKinsey and on your own, and now with Umbrex, having helped thousands and thousands of consultants at every level on every kind of project. What's the yes and? What's the yes and? Yes, they're going to use the big firms for something, a typical client, but they're also going to use a specialist or a solo for some highly specialized work that they either can't get from the big guys and gals, or the big guys and gals simply wouldn't do because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't scale.
So if you're serving the chief executive officer of a Fortune 500 on developing their 5-year corporate strategy, they're probably going to hire a global consulting firm. As an independent consultant, you're probably not going to do that project. If the Fortune 500 is doing some kind of we need to do an operations transformation and roll this out across 157 plants worldwide, you're probably not going to get engaged to at least lead that project either. But the big firms are expensive. They, roughly order of magnitude, team from McKinsey, Bain, BCG is around $150,000, $200,000 per week, right? So they'll bring those in when there is CEO level interest, when it's, a major, they need the large infrastructure of those firms, but they're not right for every project. Some projects don't require that kind of scale. So, but they still want talented people. So there's a wide range of project opportunities of needs at Fortune 500 companies and portfolio companies and mid-sized companies, small, medium-sized business that need high caliber talent, but they don't necessarily need a full consulting team with all of the infrastructure and pyramid and overhead of those firms. So, there's a big, big ocean of projects. And I think really the biggest competition that independent consultants have is not other independent consultants. And it's not the big consulting firms. It's the companies not doing the project.
Right.
The companies not doing the project because they don't have the people internally. They'd like to do the project, but they don't have the people. And it doesn't occur to them or they can't find the talent for the project. So that's the biggest barrier. I don't think about other independent consultants really as competition, just a big, big blue ocean with a lot of opportunity. So that's kind of my perspective on it.
Tremendous. All right, 2 final questions here as we're going to land the plane. The final question is how can people get connected and stay connected to more Will Bachman brilliance and the whole Umbrex empire? So we'll get to that in a second. Second, the last question is this one. If folks were to take one overarching concept away from our conversation today about discovery conversations, what to do, how to do it, what you need to have a really thorough, really effective discovery dialogue with a prospect, what would you hope that big overarching concept might be?
All right. So it's ask more questions, convert client questions into questions back at them, and be thinking ahead to composing a compelling proposal that is going to be exactly what the client wants. And the only way you can do that is to ask the client what they want. Right? So don't read their minds. It's much easier to offer a client what they want than to try to convince them to want what you have to sell. So that's my overarching is ask more questions and ask the client what they want.
Love it. All right. How can people get connected and stay connected to the Will Bachman universe, Umbrex? What resources and links can we drop in the show notes? What goodies can we share with people?
Well, thank you for asking, David. So I'll say a couple things for listeners of yours who are independent consultants and would be interested to get exposed to the project opportunities we have and our events and so forth. You can go to umbrex.com. That's UMBREX, umbrex.com. And there's a tab on there for request to join. You can go ahead and request to join our community. If you go to umbrex.com and go to /resources, we have over 30 free resources targeted at independent consultants. We have one that's been very popular. 50,000 people downloaded this one. We created a PowerPoint template for consultants. Has about 180 different designs. You can customize it with your color scheme and your logo. It's free to download. That's been very popular. We have resources on how to find a health insurance broker, business insurance broker, how to find a PowerPoint production firm, how to build a website, how to write a proposal, contract templates. So we have a ton of resources there, so we can explore that. And one in particular, we do have one that is a paid resource. It's a guide on how to set up your own consulting practice. There's 90 videos, bunch of tools and templates. We normally charge $500 for that, but we've created a discount code, which is do it, one word. In honor of you, David, DOIT. And if you use that discount code, access is free. So we wanted your listeners to have free access to that resource. So you can go, and we'll include the link in the show notes. You can sign up there. So, and also love feedback on those resources. And, listeners are welcome to ask, what else we should create. We're putting out one new one every week. So
I love it. Will Bachman with the $500 podcast episode. This is it. You just heard it. The link is in the show notes directly under this episode at bestsellingshow.com. All of Will's links, all the resources, including the special Do It code to get the consultant's guide with the 90 videos, the templates, the tools, the scripts, the downloads. Ordinarily $500. Yes, my friends, you just listened to the $500 episode of The Selling Show, courtesy of Will Bachman and Umbrex. Thank you, my friend. You're a rock star, and I appreciate you.
Thank you, David. It's been great being here.
And that wraps up another episode of The Selling Show. Hey, tell you what, if you like us, rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, tell a friend, go grab the notes and downloads and extras at thesellingshow.com. See you next time.